It's time for Supply Chain Now. Broadcasting live from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia. Heard around the world, Supply Chain Now spotlights the best in all things supply chain. The people, the technologies, the best practices, and the critical issues of the day. And now, here are your hosts.
Hey, good afternoon. Scott Luton here with you on Supply Chain Now, along with my co-host, Greg White, and a special co-host, Kara Brown. So welcome to today's episode. Got a special one in store. Today, we're talking with a business leader whose team is focused on one simple goal: optimizing carrier operations for both organizations and the environment. So stay tuned for an outstanding and very informative conversation. I should say hello first to Greg and Kara. Guys, how are we doing?
Living the dream.
Likewise. I'm doing great.
I was going to see how you're going to top that, Greg. Likewise is always a good go-to, but great to have you both here. I know everyone's been busy, a crazy start to the year, but I'm really excited of this conversation we've got teed up today. Before we welcome in our featured guests, Greg and Kara, I want to make sure, folks, hey, if you enjoy this conversation, make sure you find Supply Chain Now, wherever you get your podcasts from, and subscribe so you don't miss conversations just like this one. And guess what, Greg? Money back guarantee. Subscription's
That's right. Free subscription, money back guarantee.
That's right.
How can you go wrong?
Yeah. All right. So with no further ado, I want to bring in our special guest here today, Farah Ali, Chief Technology Officer and co-founder at FreightWeb. Farah, how you doing?
Good. Hi. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Great to have you.
Welcome aboard.
I've really enjoyed doing a little bit of homework on you and FreightWeb. FreightWeb. I'm giving you a new name. But you know, you've got a fascinating journey. We're really looking forward to sharing a lot of that with our audience here. But for starters, Greg and Kara, let's get the story on Farah. You know, where'd you get your origin story? You know, where you're from, and give us an anecdote or two about your upbringing.
Yeah, sure. So I'm more of an outsider when it comes to the logistics industry. I'm an immigrant. I moved to the U.S. when I was in my 20s. I grew up in Pakistan, did all my schooling there, did most of my college there. Moved here, worked at Microsoft on a work visa. I'm now and I got married, have two beautiful daughters. So Seattle is where I call home. But you know, all my growing up influences, my family is all from Pakistan. So it's a very interesting mix of cultures, and I always tell people I feel like, you know, I don't belong anywhere and I belong everywhere. So it's a very nomadic upbringing.
That's got to be a great way to be. And so your two daughters, we're going to talk about your professional journey in a minute, but their interests, have they shown any of their cards there yet?
Yeah, so they're 11 and 6.5. You know, at this age, if you're half, it's a big deal. So she's not 6,
right.
She's 6.5. And, you know, since my background is engineering and technology, I've always been big on, you know, STEM for girls. And I do a lot of volunteer work. I have actually a nonprofit that I run that's very focused on, you know, women in computing. And so I've tried to get them interested in just robotics. We do a lot of sort of, you know, robot kits on weekends. I got them both started in Scratch coding. Got my older one started Python. So I'm trying to like really influence them. But now I'm at this point where I'm like, I have to do it more. I have to be sly about it so they don't sort of, you know, rebel because they're like, that's what mom wants me to do. But, you know, speaking of gaming, there was a great summer camp, I think the year before last, called Girls Make Games. And I put Maya in that. And I think that was fantastic because, you know, they got to play games and then they got together as a group. They came up with a theme for a game. They actually made the game, presented to a group of people. So all kinds of learning there. So I'm hoping that they do something in STEM. You know, if it's space engineering, I wouldn't, but whatever they want.
I love that. I love that mix of skills. It sounds like that they experienced at the camp, both technical and kind of your traditional tangible skills. So before we move to Kara and walk through your professional journey, let's talk about living in Seattle. Is that where you live now, right?
I do. Yes, that's correct.
What an incredible city. What's your favorite part about, you know, residing there in the city of Seattle?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's just a very different vibe, very different culture. You're in a tech company, but it's a slower pace than say Silicon Valley. And I kind of like the gloomy weather, like the rain. So I love that it's mostly overcast and there's no sun. So I'm actually a very Seattle person. I got to do a lot of traveling when I was growing up. My my father was in the airlines, in the national airlines in Pakistan, and so one thing that was always a constant was we were changing schools and houses, and I was traveling a lot. And so I've seen a lot of the world, and when I come to Seattle, when I go somewhere and come back, it really feels like home. So I think that's just it feels like home to me.
I love that. One last question. I'll add one last question. So when you think about your upbringing and that international upbringing that you're just speaking to, and what you do now, and what the journey you've been on, is there one or two things you can point to that maybe where your family had an impact, your parents, or maybe the surroundings? What do you think helped you carve that path out?
I think, well, I definitely think there was a lack of role models actually. And so it was more about, when somebody would tell me this is not something you do, or this is not something women do or girls do, I think it had kind of that opposite effect. So it did make me more sort of want to prove it to others. So maybe a lot of my initial trying to do things started that way. I remember, I think I was in maybe like 8th grade or something. And there was this like a space camp in like this remote area in Pakistan. And I'd found an ad for it in the newspaper. And I went to my dad and I said, I really want to go, and there's a test, and can we go? And he was like, okay. And then so we went, and there was like thousands of kids, and we were all, and it was like maybe 5 girls or something. And, I didn't think there was anything weird about that at all. And I gave that test and I actually got selected. I was one of 10 girls and there were 20 boys. And I went and was camping in the space camp in Pakistan, northern areas, by myself for about 2 weeks, no parents. And I think, stuff like that, where I think my family was very progressive and very sort of, I never had, you can't do something because of, who you are, or because we don't have money or whatever. So I think the fact that, there are all of these possibilities out there was just always something that I believed in. I don't think it was true, so in a way, they could have led me down a very different, horrible, and disappointing path, but I'm glad it worked out.
I love that. And it sounds like we're just scratching the surface on that upbringing. So maybe we'll have to circle back. But Kara, let's dive more into Farah's professional journey.
Yeah, I love it. Kara and Farah. So great. Farah, I love the comments on like being the only woman sort of or not the only one, but being one of the few women in space camp, right? It seems like that's sort of been your mojo ever since then. Tell us about everyone, I feel like women or men, have some sort of story about how they ended up in supply chain, right? There are not that many few people. There are more now that sort of make the decision early on that they're going to go to school for supply chain. But like me, I'm sure you have a story of how you sort of ended up in the space. I'd love to hear about sort of how you got to where you are today.
Sure. I mean, I wouldn't say supply chain was a, passion since I was born. My natural inclination has always been sort of math and science. And so my background, I have a computer science degree. I was at Microsoft out of college. I did everything from shrink wrap to online services to machine learning. And then I was at eBay, where I got that first sort of, worked with anything logistics or last mile. I think definitely got a sense of how complicated things are. Like I remember working with sellers in Asia Pacific and, thinking through like cross-border trade issues. And I remember being on these phone calls with like China Post and Hong Kong Post to integrate them. And, just like getting our processes through was so hard, right? Everything is just with globalization, there's just so many more complications. And so I think getting a better sense of, what last mile issues are, what are with, warehousing your own or outsourcing, integrating at scale, you might be at a very different stage in your tech journey and you're integrating with someone who's at a very different stage, either higher or lower. So I think definitely saw the tech challenges, didn't see as much of the business challenges before from a global point of view, definitely US centric. At EA, I got to do a lot more with scale. So I was responsible for the platform that basically you provision and manage every service for every game that's internal to EA. So every studio that wants to build, let's say, a first-person shooter like FIFA, right? So FIFA needs identity and leaderboards and matchmaking. And so how they actually integrate with the same, that's what they would do through our team. And any external publisher that wanted to publish with the game maker, they would go through our platform. And so I learned a lot about scale and about using tech as a tool for driving business forward. And so when I met Will and when we decided to co-found FreightWeb, I was really looking at my journey from like moving from search or developer tools to search to logistics to gaming. I'd always moved domains, but I kind of kept that core of like, I'm really good at technology, I'm really good at machine learning, data to solve problems. And I thought that transportation in general and logistics tech, there's a lot of opportunity. And if I said like the gaming when I got into it was 10 years behind the tech industry, I could say that transportation and trucking is maybe 20 years behind the gaming industry, and so maybe 30 years behind the tech industry, which means that there's a lot of maybe barrels that you can draw and low-hanging fruit that you can come and solve for that hasn't been solved for. And then there's a lot of deep tech problems as well. So for me, it's more about looking at tech challenges. And then, when I got into sort of the business side, I mean, the rule of thumb is so trucking or transportation is about 4% of GDP of any country. So that's about 800 billion for the US, right? And that's huge. And about 560 billion of that is for hire trucking, which is kind of the space that we're in. There's just 1% of that is huge, right? And so there's just a lot of places where you can add value. So that's kind of my journey.
I had a boss a long time ago who told me, even though we were growing a business, that there was no way that we would ever be a leader in the marketplace because there physically couldn't be a leader in the market. This is specifically brokerage because it's just too big. And it stuck with me for a long time that it's just the power of the marketplace is so massive. Did you have any sort of experiences or key positions sort of as you were building your career that have really shaped your worldview for either your entrance into the supply chain space or specifically how you think about your customers at FreightWeb? And I know Greg will go into sort of really specific questions on what FreightWeb does, but just sort of you and how you developed your worldview. Did you have some like moments of this is why I think this way?
I think, I guess I'd have to go back to the tech because I always look at, what is something that I can do that maybe other people can't do as well. And I think that is kind of my secret sauce or whatever, my subject matter expertise. And I always thought that, for example, I'll give you an example from eBay. When I joined, we were looking at, introducing sort of shipping science, machine learning into shipping. And we said, okay, how do we drive business? How do we drive more opportunity through the marketplace? And we said, okay, what are some variables? You have your ship cost and ship time. And on a marketplace like eBay, you have sellers. And so you really are dependent on their handling time. So if you bought something from a seller, but they don't ship it until 3 days later, that really does impact your end delivery. So we said, okay, can we look at all of this massive years of data that we have and predict the delivery, right? So can we actually say like, these sellers are going to be shipping this stuff in 4 business days or less, and then they will have free delivery as well. And then can we give anything that comes up for a search query, like if you say Canon DSLR, we'll rank stuff higher that has that can go in 4 business days or less and has free delivery. We'll give it different treatment. We'll give those sellers a higher sort of rating, so they are incentivized to keep their handling time low. So they're incentivized to offer free delivery. And so it's things like that where you actually are impacting your gross merchandising volume that is going through the marketplace. You're impacting business metrics through, I would say, small tech innovations, right? Like that's not a revolutionary idea, but at the time it was, right? And it was a very simple way to sort of drive effectiveness. And so I think I look at that as, okay, I can look at data. There's no central place where you can go and look at sort of every carrier's data across the ecosystem, how the carriers performed across 17,000 brokerages in the US. And that's, if you had that data, you would be in a much better position to really address, the quality of the carrier, right? Versus sort of saying, here's how they did, with broker A and broker B and broker C. And so I think just looking at data, making it more transparent, but also making it very easy to digest the metric that you're tuning for, so that people can be data driven, and then they can be very actionable in how, when that data changes, they're like, oh, my business isn't doing well because XYZ, let me go work on these things. So I think those are the kind of things like, oh my God, so geeky, but that's probably what drives me.
I love it. I'll take all those supply chain geeks in the world for sure. Most of them have been on this podcast at some point.
That's
For
true.
1,000,
Great. I feel
Alex. Yeah.
Exactly. Farah, do you have like maybe in the last couple of years, as you've been building FreightWeb and learning more about carriers specifically and the supply chain market, less from the sort of the shipper side and more from the carrier side, have you had sort of a eureka moment of understanding of sort of, holy cow, this is the holy grail, or a moment that really made it sort of all click for you?
I mean, I'm still learning, so I don't know enough to be able to say I have a eureka moment and I know it all. I would be lying. But I think that, at least to me, it seemed, with carriers, they don't, brokers and shippers talk a lot about, carrier relationship and relationship and relationship. Like I hear that a lot. I see that on LinkedIn a lot. But when I talk to the carriers, I really don't feel that they have that sense of stickiness or they have that sense of loyalty. They will work with any broker or any shipper who will meet their criteria. And
Sure.
so, and then there's a lot of demands on like, technology that they have to use, ELD tracking. You're talking to, a guy with 4 trucks or 2 trucks. It's, they're just heads down trying to run their business. They don't have time for a lot. And so when we're really talking about relationships, I don't know if we really think about helping carriers and truckers really make a business out of what they're doing. And when you look at the data, it's, I think the number is something like there's close to 900,000 for hire trucking companies. 97% of that are 20 trucks or less. So I mean, somewhere in that ballpark, right? That's huge. That's a huge fragmentation there. And so what can we offer them? How do we build not just loyalty, but like, can I go to a trucker and say, I can guarantee you, X dollars of freight every month. Here's a check at the beginning of every month. And if I meet your criteria, I book this much freight for you. Is that good for you? And if you do at least, because we're thinking through FreightWeb, we're like, could we build something like that where we say, if you do at least 10 bookings through us, we'll provide you this thing. I don't see anybody, for example, looking at insurance, health insurance or workers' comp. That's a big deal for some of these smaller companies. And so, I think there's a lot more we as an industry have to do to really treat, these smaller 1 to 20 trucking companies and even 1 to 75 and 150 as businesses and really trying to help them because, a lot of them are just, they fizzle out in a year because it's just so hard to keep a truck running. So that's my biggest takeaway is, how do we provide the incentive to the carrier so that they will provide tracking and on-time delivery and all those things because they are getting a very clear ROI from that. And it becomes less about, oh, they don't like tech or they don't use tech, right? It's like, okay, what's in it for them? Does that mean they get a top carrier rating on eBay if it was an eBay, right? So that's kind of my eureka moment is I think we have to think through a lot more about our trucking side, our supply side of the market.
I think there's a couple of things that I would call eureka moments there. One is the data, right? Of course, the value of data these days is so clear and transparent. I mean, we evaluate companies all the time and, they may have a functional or an operational play, but where the real opportunity is in the data, right? So your engineering mind, clearly engineering mind, I think is natural and very beneficial to supply chain in that. And we see that so often, people who are engineers getting into supply chain. I know it's probably hard for our listeners and community to believe, but more of us went to space camp than went to supply chain camp as kids, right? I can't think of one person of, kind of our generation who was going, gosh, should I be a race car driver, a rock star, or a supply chain professional, right? But that recognition is good, and also with them, right? What's in it for them, right? So that I think that's important, and that is the key to breaking through, especially. I mean, if I have not been familiar with the trucking industry my whole career. I was in retail for a long time, and what I often said was, here's the PO. You guys go off to that dark room and find a truck to get it here on time. And I don't care who. I don't care about the relationship. I just care about the relationship with my supplier getting my goods here on time. So that has shifted, as you said, with the shippers. That's really impressive, and that they recognize the value of that. But so you talked a lot about empowerment of these companies and enablement through data and your awareness of what's in it for them. So tell us a little bit about how you manifest all of those learnings in your co-founding of FreightWeb. What of those learnings does this deliver on? I'm curious.
I think we looked at, we first looked at the data, we looked at the market size. So we said, okay, there's a lot of room. Even if we mess up, there's a lot of room for that too in here, right? So just the sheer addressable market size was one huge draw in learning.
Yeah.
The second is there's a lot of public data available about our supply chain, about transportation. There's data that, every truck that goes on the freeway has to get weighed at the weigh station. And so there's data available about that. And I was looking at that, and, one thing was like, there's just so much waste. 50% of trucks are, less than half full, or, there's 1 out of 4 is 50% full, and 3 out of 4 are, 75% full or something like that. And so, we looked at that and we said, that's a huge, then we came up with like some number, like $265 billion worth of opportunity. You're transporting air. I'm sure we can do something better with it. And so I looked at that and said, okay, there's stuff that, it's going to be better for the environment. It's better for the trucking company. It's better for the shipper. It's like everybody benefits. So why are we not solving this problem, this optimization problem? And then maybe my gaming mind went into it, because I was like, well, this is like Tetris. I mean, it's not, you gotta put the puzzle pieces together.
Right.
And, it's not as easy as it looks, right? There's a lot of, last in, first out. How do you actually plan the trips and stuff? But it's a doable problem. And so kind of looking at that, and then just looking at, there's a lack of transparency in terms of data. There are no regulations. You don't have to abide by certain things, which is okay, but that doesn't mean you don't have transparency, right? Because everybody learns, everybody becomes better. And so we initially started with, gosh, can we take, LTL and partial shipments and match and combine them to optimize and build these better truckloads, right? Can we do Tetris there? And so we started, building tech for that matching problem, specifically into like partials and combining. We actually have a really cool patent pending hardware tech that's essentially this rack that has adjustable shelving, and it has an IoT device. And so, if you have a 6-foot thing and a 3-foot thing, you can actually now stack it without damage, and you can think of electronics and paint cans and hazmat material. Like there's a lot of things that we're useful for, and we build it so that they're nestable and stackable, and they're lightweight enough, and they can go in the truck itself. So we kind of looked at like, how can we optimize this, dry van for cube that nobody's ever changed? Like, we have all this innovation, yet the trucks never change. Like, nobody's thought about those things. And so we looked at kind of every aspect of it. And then, we didn't plan for COVID. So COVID hit. And then what we realized, and just in terms of running a company, is the partial matching really only works with volume. And so when we're not able to see those volumes and we're new, we really can't do a good job. We're essentially then shipping partials in a half full truck. So we're not really solving the problem, but we were able to prove that with our tech that we can actually solve the problem. And if we add the racks to it, there's 20% more capacity on the truck that you can utilize. And so we said, okay, what's the next step? Like, how do we actually operationalize this? And we started talking to shippers and 3PLs and brokers. And we really narrowed into, brokers. And what I realized is that, they're actually a pretty underserved community in terms of tech, because they don't have, you have like C.H. Robinson, which is what, 20 billion annually in freight, right? And then you have like next one down is very different. And then you have these 17 to 20,000 brokers that are all across the spectrum, right? And so your, 50 million a year revenue broker does not have a tech team. Even if they did, they wouldn't know how to, get some of this data, hire a machine learning person and all of that. And so, we just sort of looked at, how do we help these brokers compete with all these online brokerages and digital brokerages? And, how do we actually make it so that then they are able to run their stuff more efficiently, and that helps the supply. They're able to, they're not focused on the margins as much because they are actually, using tech. So, their margins are much better. And we found that there was a lot of, resonated a lot with the brokers. And so that's kind of, we started, if you will, from, just looking at pure partials to looking at then partials and full truckload for, with brokers, primarily brokers and 3PLs, and then connecting them to supply for this Tetris problem.
So, and that's what it does, basically, Tetris for a trailer, right?
Yeah,
so,
that's how I like to think about it. Yeah.
So is there an example that stands out in your mind? Because I'm visualizing something, I'm not sure I'm right. Is there a particular problem that that you've solved that sticks in your mind?
So I would, we have an internal dev team sort of code word for it. They say it's like the Tinder for trucks. So essentially, that's now you can visualize.
I'm writing that down, Farah. I'm writing that down.
Yeah.
I get sued by Tinder.
Not truck drivers, Scott. Just
right,
truck.
not truck drivers.
But it's essentially a
There's probably a
problem.
future in that.
There probably is. Maybe we should brainstorm after this.
Yeah.
But it's really, it is a magic problem. So what we do is we say, look, we're going data about supply, right? And so we have, transactions from multiple shipments and multiple customers, and we can dynamically score a carrier based on those transactions. So instead of a broker just knowing about the carrier within their ecosystem, now we know it across the ecosystem. So think of the parallels with like eBay, right? Think of it as a eBay for freight brokers, where you have a common, rating for the carrier, and that's a dynamic scoring for the carrier that changes with every shipment, where we have better on-time delivery data about them, customer satisfaction data about them. We know their safety ratings and as they change, and pricing. As we know more pricing data, we can say how good are they, how accurate within a certain variance. And so what we try to do is match with trucks. That's as simple as that. It's an automated sourcing and capacity platform. It's a tech platform trying to be the middle person. We're trying to solve that tech problem for anybody who wants to find that capacity, but we're trying to do it in a very quality driven way. So it's really looking at, I care about, like, for example, a customer we work with, they only care about, as long as I meet my equipment type criteria and, they're on this lane, that's it. But there's other more sophisticated customers who say, we want to know what small businesses exist. We want to know which businesses are green. We want to know that, they're someone that we've done repeat business, or they have done repeat business on this lane. We know that they've moved recently. How many trucks have they moved in this lane, right? So we have very sophisticated ways of matching, but then we have the ability to let the customer specify what's important to them, and we rate that higher. And so I would say the 4 key things that probably we provide are, this proprietary matching algorithm, and then matching and then converting that into, and so we do the whole transaction flow, right? You have the documentation and tracking and all of that. And then this pricing, we actually estimate what we think the current market price should be, what your book now price should be, what your bidding price, initial and reserve should be. And so that's something that, and all of these are self-learning. So they're not static models. The more transactions through the system, the better the stuff gets, right? So the pricing, for example, is going to be really good for dry van, flatbed, and reefer right now, because we have more of those. Because as we get more, let's say, step deck or whatever, we'll get better there. Then the third is the carrier rating. And what I learned talking to some of like big customers is internally, some of these big customers have a concept of quality. They are scoring, but that's not very common because it's just not ubiquitous data across the industry. And so we can provide that as a standard. That's something that's very valuable, because other customers can see how this carrier performs across the ecosystem, right? And so that's something, and that's dynamic. So if a carrier moves from 80% on-time delivery most of the time to 85 to 90, that brings their score up. And then that brings that incentive thing into play, because they see that better freight. And then the fourth piece is where I think that's the biggest area for opportunity long is actionable insights. So how do we help these companies become more data driven, right? Can they say, like, how this is increasing not just their efficiency, but their yield, right? Can they actually do twice the number of transactions because now they have their team and then they can do, 50 or 100% more online, right? Without humans, right? Can they track things like how many shipments completed with no errors, with no payment issues? And then just their network optimization, right? You can show them like, these are the people you've worked with. This is how stuff has been good. These are people that, you've always lost money with or whatever have you. And so really helping them decide, like you look at that data and you plan for the new year and you sort of track that metric. So really optimize within your own ecosystem too. And there's just tons and tons of, I think, we're just scratching the surface there on the data analytics piece of it.
Wow. That's a really important component. I'm sure you face a little bit of headwinds in this industry, as you said, not naturally transparent, sometimes a little cash grabby, right? You see a lot more people bragging about hustling and bragging about making big bucks than you do about providing great service. Just the casual observations I've made on LinkedIn and some other social media. But I think it's great.
Why do you think there's a lot of bragging about hustling in this industry, which I'm like, that's not a thing. You probably
yeah, I think that's a really good point, because you're really addressing, a lot of the hustling is inefficiency, right? It's what could be an unnecessary phone call or an unnecessary inquiry or an unnecessary explanation or apology for failed service, right? And it's kind of like ages ago, I worked for a company that got an award for customer service, which told me we had terrible preliminary service, so we had to have great customer service.
Well, and along these lines, Greg, what was interesting is how Farah mentioned earlier in an earlier segment, how as her team's talking with the carriers, despite all we hear about this massive appeal for relationships, and I'll admit I'm in that camp, but what she's finding, what the data is telling her team, is that it's not there on the carrier side, and it's probably my hunch, uneducated hunch, is it's a lot of what y'all two are both speaking to.
It's hustling. These small carriers, the ones that you're talking about, Farah, I thought about that too, Scott, when you mentioned that, Farah. And these small carriers, they got to eat, right? And, we hear from some every day. Josue Ramos, Scott, immediately comes to mind. And what Nerf Nadarovich and his team are doing comes immediately to mind. And some of these folks, they have to run in order to eat. And, the relationship with their care or with their shipper isn't nearly as important as the relationship with their wife and family. And, in the grand scheme of things, what I see this is a leverage point that allows them to be more efficient and more effective and more timely without all the hustling. Right.
I would just like to point out, Farah is the first guest that I can recall that's turned the tables on Greg White and said, well, tell me why you think that is, Greg. Really, when's the last time we've heard that? I love that. I really love that.
Sorry.
No,
don't apologize.
Are you kidding me? I hope I knew the answer. But you know what I think is interesting also, and Farah, we just got off a call with Mike Griswold, who's an analyst, a VP analyst at Gartner. And, a lot of what we talked about, you've kind of touched on here. Some of it is, we talked about how certain positions have ascended to the C-suite, the chief supply chain officer, the chief technology officer. And even though the chief technology officer ascended to the C-suite ages ago, we were talking about how you used to hear the conversation about what the business people think and what the technical people think. And I think what you've demonstrated here is that technical people, technology people, are also the business people, because you've talked a lot more about the business than the technology. So in as much as that's the case, I'm curious, what does a day in the life of Farah Ali look like? It's a jumble. It's a hustle, isn't it?
It's a hustle. I have, this is my first startup. as you know, I'm the CTO and the co-founder, and so with a very small team, a lot of my time, is spent doing kind of everything. And so I think initially a lot of spent on, how do we build the systems, where do we, do we use cloud native, or what do we do there, what tech stack we should use, and then as kind of we hire the right people, and I have, more senior people who can kind of drive some of the technical discussions themselves. I just come in when, a tiebreaker or they need my help, thinking through a problem. So I spend a lot more of my time now on the algorithms, on figuring out like how can we make things smarter, because that's something that's going to continuously evolve. So I spent some time there. I think primarily I'm talking to our customers every day. So I do a lot of my time with them because that's kind of how I know what to build next. So it's really very customer feedback driven, and that's where I'm getting a lot of what I'm talking about is from them. The issues that they face. They want access to more capacity. They want quality over quantity. They want actionable insights. They're not. I mean, some of the stuff you said about people bragging about how they're doing great and how there's fraud or people not sharing. I actually, when I'm talking to the customers, I don't have that sense. Like, I think the broker customers, they're very open to doing all kinds of stuff. They're very open to sharing their data. I thought the hardest thing would be to get them to give their data. They're like, oh, we want the past 3 years or the 5 years, And so I think that really hit on a nerve. Like, they really need that help. They're saying, we understand that if we are to survive, some of them, like this, and for us, like if we need to grow, we need to be able to, we need to be able to be more efficient, and we need to be able to get more yield. We can't just rely on, just taking more of that margin, because then we can't do the right thing, right? And it's not, the brokers also trying to just make sure that they're running their business. I don't think they're every day thinking like, I'm going to screw the carrier by doing this. That's just not how they're thinking. And so I think there's also this, there's a lot of misrepresentation. I don't think that there's a lot of people that are just trying to do the wrong thing. I think both sides are just trying to, make the living. And then, a lot of them they don't want to hustle. They want a normal life. They want, family is important. Work isn't everything. And so they want to be smart about how they do stuff. They don't want to spend all their time on phones with angry people, right? Nobody wants to do that. And so I think that's where I spend a lot of my time, and I learn a lot about how to build a product. And then a lot of just administrative stuff, which is the stuff I don't like. But like there's
raise your hand
part
if
of
you
the
like
job, right? Yeah.
So
and then because we are a VC-backed company, there's a lot of time spent with our investors, and then talking to new investors, pitching to them. I was looking at my calendar and probably talked to 25 VCs in December, and that's like that's a lot of talking. So so yeah, it's just there's the external facing stuff you have to do, and then there's a lot of the internal facing stuff.
love that. You're kind of foreshadowing where we're going next. But I'm going to ask all three of y'all here. But there's a strong entrepreneurial sense amongst this panel here. So I'm going to ask each of y'all. I'll start with Farah. If there's one piece of advice that you would offer other entrepreneurs, or as I heard someone put it earlier this week, entrepreneurs. There's always that phase, right, where before you make the leap, some never make the leap, others make it in spades and then some. Or early stage companies are looking to break through, get their first round of funding, or whatever. What is it, Farah? What's one piece of advice? And Kira and Greg, y'all stay tuned. I'm coming around to you next. But Farah, what's one piece of advice that you'd offer those folks?
I think from my experience, I would say, going from 0 to 1 is just the hardest thing. It doesn't matter what it is, right? And so, you're going to have a lot of rejection. You're going to have a lot of people say your idea sucks. You don't know what you're doing. What do you know about logistics? All kinds of things. And I think it's very, very easy to be demotivated, guess yourself, to want to shut down the business pretty much daily in the first year. And then you have stuff like, the political climate last year, the COVID, there's a massive unemployment, there's stuff happening around you all the time, and then their personal life too. And so it's just everything can really get you down. And you can have days where it's like, you really question why you're doing this. And so I think it's very, very important to have your why be really clear in your head, and you don't need to prove to other people, but you need to have some data point or whatever it is to convince you when you're in those moments to go back and say, this is why I'm doing it, and this is why this works, or this is why I think it's a good idea. And just because an investor turns you down doesn't mean that you're not worth it, that you don't have a good idea, that you don't have a good product. The only proof is in actually providing value to customers. And if you're providing value and your customers are telling you, that's really what you should be looking for. So I think just because I'm so, it's only been, slightly years in this journey, I would say that that's been one of the hardest things, because you probably also don't know a lot of other people around you who are in that same space. And so you don't have a lot of people to vent to or get advice from. And so, if mentorship is something that helps you, but whatever it is that helps you, I would say, try to have that why and try to not second guess yourself or don't feel like a failure, because there's plenty of people who are going to feel that anyway. You don't have to do it yourself. Put your best foot forward, and always, don't be shy about singing your own praises. That's never a bad thing.
What I heard, some of what you say there, Farah, is buck up, because you gotta put it in a headlock and believe in yourself. And you shared a lot more than just that, but I appreciate you sharing that, Farah. All right, Kara, same question. What's one thing that if you had one piece of advice to give to our entrepreneur community that might be listening?
I love it so much. So Farah said something that I said to my husband last night on the couch, which is, babe, should I just go get a job? Like, this is so hard. Should I? And it happens like probably weekly that I say it sort of in a joking way, and monthly that I say it in like an almost serious way. And my husband, Eric, he'll say things like, so is this the monthly tech where we have to talk about like how you're a rock star and it's going to be fine? And I'm like, yeah, this is the moment. And I think owning that, right, is super important. And hearing another entrepreneur say it, I'm like, oh, yeah, that's exactly how it feels. And so I'm going to do a shameless plug for two organizations that I think are super, super valuable when it comes to other entrepreneurs. One is EO. I'm a huge fan. It's the Entrepreneur Organization. They have a group for folks that are not quite in $1 million in revenue, and then they have a group of folks that are $1 million plus, and then 10 million plus. You get into the next club. And the 6 to 8 people that I meet with monthly are the first people I call when I have a huge issue. They're the first ones that are like, you're going to be great. It's going to be fine. Right. Like and sharing that, it's lonely at the top. Right. And sharing that with other folks that sort of, they're like, I feel that way too sometimes, which is really great. And then specifically being a woman entrepreneur just adds a whole nother level of stuff, right? Less than 2% of female founders will ever break $1 million in revenue. So there's very few women that will ever sort of be in that club. Yeah, it's actually 1.7.
Wow.
According to American Express. And that's a lonely club, right? Of women, moms that sort of also get where you're at in your life. And so Launchpad 2X is another organization that I will shamelessly plug, which is just women. It's women entrepreneurs and finding other people that can connect with the drama that you will go through, even if it's just self-imposed drama in your own head, right, is super important. So the community around you, I think, is really important when you're building a business.
Excellent point. A lot of good stuff there. All right, Greg, we get a chance to hear from the entrepreneurial Jedi here. All right, Greg.
Well, Farah didn't exactly say it, but she spoke to it when she talked about what she does in a day-to-day basis. The most thing she most talked about was KYC, know your customer. Mm-hmm. Too many companies, too many entrepreneurs think they know what the market wants, and they, even when they investigate the market, they ask questions that project their bias into the conversation, and they don't really ask, what is it you want? And I'm suddenly, after talking to 24 companies a month to evaluate for investment, I am stunned at how many of these companies have the strong potential to pivot themselves out of business because they refuse to understand their customer sufficiently. And that is the key, the singular key to success. Assuming that you've got a good foundation, it is the singular operational key to success, I'll say, for any early stage or startup company. Know your customer and never stop asking. I mean, Farah is talking to companies that they already do business with and figuring out what else they need. Talk to companies you don't do business with or you can't do business with or just won't do business with you, and find out those things as well. Send people into the marketplace, be in the marketplace yourself. Encourage everyone who ever talks to a customer or prospect to ask what it is they really need, and really mean it when they ask that, because you won't know until you ask the question completely open-ended. But it's a very, very important thing. The most important thing as a company starts, because you will inevitably pivot. You know, when you talk about some of the frustrations that Kara alluded to, I don't know, Kara, in your industry, but in tech, it is very often the case that someone goes in and says, this is the problem we're going to solve. And the market says, nope, it's not the problem you're going to solve. You're going to solve this problem over here because I ain't giving you money for that problem over there. And there will inevitably be at least one pivot, but more than one pivot is too expensive for most companies. So know your customer.
Greg, I'm really curious. Do you have a rubric that you follow, or is there some guru, or are you the guru who should create a rubric and write the book on on like what are the questions that you should be asking to really get to know your customer?
I do have a guru that I follow. Yes. In fact, he's at ATDC. So he was a member of the Super Soaker team and sold their product to Nerf. And Shane you can't do enough. I mean, you can't do enough market research to satisfy Shane. So yeah, I have learned that from him, and from, you know, having a few companies myself, and from having entered the market with that significant level of bias. But you know, I think there's only one question to ask, right? And that is, what has the greatest mind share for you in terms of problems right now? Yeah. I mean, Scott and I do it when we talk to companies about campaigns. We don't go in and say, what kind of campaign do you want to do? We say, what is the problem you're trying to solve? What's the thing that keeps you awake? What is it you are running fast away from? What do you see as the biggest threat to your company? And that may not be a problem that you can solve, which is a bummer, but better you know that now, because they're going to give money to those things that they are running fast away from.
Including administrative work, Farah. Lots and lots of administrative work.
That's why RPA is so hot, right? Robotic process automation is so hot, because who wants to do those jobs, right?
Well, Farah,
fewer and fewer people every day.
Keeps you humble.
Farah, you're in a cool spot, because when you ask that question, you actually have the technical know-how, you and your team, to solve those problems and then take them back to market. I think that's really exciting, is when you're on the front edge and you can do what Greg says and ask the question, go back and say, oh shoot, we're not quite solving this problem. Let's change these 3 algorithms and make a new UX for this thing. And then all of a sudden you've got a whole new product. Do you find that? Are you sort of in that mode right now?
Absolutely. Like, you know, just moving from partials to full, and like, you know, just having the, you know, I really wanted that to work, because I was like, that's a huge space. But, you know, you're like, oh, I have to solve this basic, like just capacity sourcing at its basic level doesn't exist the way that it should, and is not available to everybody the way that it should be. And if that's what my customer is asking for, then I better stop tinkering around here and move here. And the racks are great, but nobody wants to invest in the racks, because that's change management right now for them. They really want to solve this first. And so definitely. And I think it's also the most fun, right? Like when you're customer obsessed and, you know, you're talking to them and they keep telling you what's not working and they want more, like that's really when you know you have a problem market fit. And that's when you know that, okay, I'm solving this, and I, you know, then scale and revenue are just things that I have to, or somebody has to look at, but I'm onto something here. I think that's the most exciting, where like for me, you know, I'm very value driven, and if I don't think I'm adding value to something, it's very hard for me to motivate myself. And so if I'm doing something and there's nobody interested in it, it's very boring for me, you know, to do that.
Do you get those signals really quickly, Farah?
Yeah, I think that was one thing that I was very surprised about, is we failed fast through our, you know, I wouldn't like, there weren't exact pivots, because, you know, it's the same underlying tech, but like we very quickly, and I think that comes from what Greg was saying, you know, KYC is you know who to talk to, you're going there, you're asking a lot of the right questions, and the mind share thing really is it, right? And the more you try to fit your thing into their, square peg round hole, and it's just not fitting, and you're like, okay, I'm actually trying to solve a problem that they may not yet have, or that is a problem but not big enough than this other problem here, right? Greg, you were saying something?
No, yeah, well, yeah, I was kind of hoping to, you've shared so much awareness and mindfulness and insight into this problem. I'm curious, what outside of the problem that you're solving has really got your attention these days? I mean, anything future, past, current in the industry, or maybe even outside the industry that you're really putting bandwidth toward in terms of concern or solution or hope or whatever?
Yeah, I do. I mean, so I do run, like I said, I have two nonprofits that I run. One is just a poverty alleviation. I do a lot of work for local homeless. There's a school, a K-12 school in Pakistan that I'm, funding and running. And so I help look at like the tech curriculum. There's a vocational training. So, I definitely have a thing for, community service. I've always had it, been running One Good Act since I think 2011, and then Pakistani women in computing is something I started because I didn't have a lot of role models growing up, and I thought I need to show up and pay it forward. And so this past year I thought about unemployment a lot. I thought about a lot of the people that I was interacting with in the industry were just finding it hard to survive, and trucking wasn't their only job. And and you mentioned families. There's wives with new babies who are like dispatching, right? There was just a lot of stress. And so I've been thinking about sort of how how this massive unemployment impacts our market, and how does that change the future of work, right? I think we're going to be in a space where maybe creating things is going to be more democratic, and that's how some of these employment opportunities will happen. I'm seeing a lot of that on LinkedIn, popping up, which I think is great. But it'd be great to have, how do we go and kind of help them outside of like, yes, investing in these companies? How do you discover the right people? So just thinking about that, how do I find deal flow for stuff that I'm interested in? I think just healthcare, supply chain, manufacturing are going to go through massive changes post COVID, right? I think that's something I look at as just overall for interest. I think one of the biggest things was how quickly this vaccine got made and approved and in the market. Like I was, thinking maybe 2021 summer, maybe we'll start seeing something. And so it shows me that the globalization of healthcare and sharing of data has made it possible to get this to the market so fast. And developing countries are also benefiting, right? Like in Pakistan, there's a company, I think AstraZeneca, I think they've just got approved. And so that equity there is something that's making me feel very good about some of the globalization. And so I'm very interested to see how we can solve some of these equity problems with employment and with healthcare. So that's just something that I'm very interested in. And I think, I guess, lastly, when you think about technology and we say, a lot of stuff, like if you assume a future where a lot of stuff can be done by computers, does that mean that there's a higher value that we put on people and them creating and their creative side, art and music and stuff that, I think humans can do better. And so how do we actually think about, the value of some of those things that we create, and does that become more important going forward? So yeah, I think about a lot of things. I read a lot, but I really, I'm hoping to be able to spend some time this year to help where I can with, definitely unemployment in the U.S. I think it's going to be a huge for us if we don't think about it and help solve it.
Outstanding. A ton of stuff there. We'll have to save that for our follow-up episode with you, Farah. I appreciate you sharing, and I appreciate how active you are beyond, your primary venture, all the two nonprofits and all the give back, locally and abroad that you're speaking to and involved with. That's what we need. And on a broader sense, way at the beginning of this conversation, you talked about how, I can't remember exactly how you put it, but basically you weren't born to do supply chain. Well, it is such a neat thing, and it is so needed for our industry to have folks that weren't born to do supply chain. That's how this industry is getting so much better at a time when, as Kara's put it before, this is supply chains. How do you say it, Kara?
Supply chain's moment. This is it
Yes.
right now.
Rockstar
And-
moment. Yeah.
Rockstar
Really?
moment. We're dusting off the VPs of supply chain and shaking them off. I love it.
That's right. And we couldn't do that. Despite all the respect I have for how supply chain existed when I, stepped into my first manufacturing role 15, 20 years ago, whatever it was. It is such a great thing to see how it's evolved and how we've embraced on so many different levels this new creative, different type of thinking. So the global industry is better off, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you and the FreightWeb's team are up to in the months to come. Sounds like you're on the move. So on that note, let's make sure folks know how to connect with Farah. Farah, where do you point people to?
LinkedIn. You can shoot me an invite, and you could email me at farah@myfreightweb.com. Yeah, I'm pretty accessible.
Outstanding. And then we'll make sure we have that in the show notes. We'll have your URL in the show notes, make it, or after that one click, make things easy. So
Awesome.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go around the horn too. Kara, how can folks connect with you and the lead coverage team?
Yeah, we're at leadcoverage.com, just like it sounds. And I'm Kara at leadcoverage.com.
Just that easy. And Greg, I don't usually do this because we, if folks want to learn more about what we do and all the conversations we have, supplychainnow.com. But I bet the entrepreneurial conversation, each of y'all, which you contributed here, might generate some interest. So how can folks connect with the, can I say it? The Wizard of Wichita? Can I say it anymore? You haven't made it official. Can I say it? Or can I not?
Go, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah. Pay no attention to the man behind the VC. Yeah, well, I mean, aside from supply chain now, I do work with Kubera Venture Capital. So Greg at Kubera, Kubera, means wealth in Hindi, I think, .vc.
Perfect.
Kubera.vc.
Just say
Yeah.
that. See, I learned something new today. I didn't know that what Kubera stood for. So, but really enjoy. I know we couldn't go as deep into some of these really subjects that we're all passionate about, but fascinating story, Farah and FreightWeb. We're going to keep our finger on the pulse there and see what the next big things that y'all are driving. So thanks so much, Farah Ali, Chief Technology Officer and co-founder at FreightWeb. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.
All right. So don't go anywhere. We're going to sign off. Big thanks to, of course, Kara Brown and my tag team partner, Greg White. Great conversation, outstanding conversation, wide ranging, a lot of passion in the room. We'll have to book some sequels, but regardless, to our audience, hopefully you enjoyed it as much as we have. To learn more and find similar conversations just like this one, go to supplychainnow.com. Of course, you can find us and subscribe for free, money back guarantee, wherever you get your podcast from. On behalf of the entire team here, this is Scott Luton signing off for now. Hey, do good, give forward, be the change that's needed. Hey, be like Farah Ali, and we'll see you next time here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.